Hi, I'm Scott Stevens, lead pastor of Northway Christian Community. I'm excited you're here to listen to this message from our teaching team. I'm also excited that you are intentionally seeking to grow in your relationship with Jesus. By watching this message, our hope is your faith will be challenged as you learn more about who God is and how much He loves each and every one of us. However, watching or listening to a message is just one part of spiritual growth. In addition to being challenged by a message, I believe it's so important to be part of a local church community. At a local church, you can develop friendships and insights with other believers and also help to connect with those who are searching for God and not yet following Jesus. So, whether it is Northway or one of the other great churches throughout the Pittsburgh region, or if you're watching from some other part of the world, please consider taking this step toward being part of a local church. And if you do visit Northway, I want you to know that we are a church community that is passionate about learning to love people where we live and work and play. And there is certainly room for you at all of our Pittsburgh locations. Visit our website at northway.org for all the details. Hey folks, enjoy the message, and we hope to see you soon. We are in week 2 of a series that we've titled Unlearn, and we're looking at a sermon that Jesus spoke. It's recorded by one of his disciples, a man named Matthew. So what do we know about Matthew? Well, we know that he was a tax collector, and that would have made him wildly unpopular among the Jewish people. Tax collectors were considered traitors. They were employed by the Roman government, and at that time, the Roman government was oppressing and ruling over the Jews. They were hired because, see, they knew sort of how and where the money flowed among their own people. So they were able to get in there and intercept it and had the authority from Rome to seize taxes. And then they would keep some for themselves. These folks were despised, commonly just called sinners. We know that one day Jesus stopped by Matthew's office, his tax collecting booth, and he asked Matthew to quit his job and to follow him, and we know that Matthew said yes, and it does not appear that he even gave a 2-week notice. He just quit and began to follow him. We also know, like almost immediately, that this guy Matthew, he threw a party at his house, invited all his buddies, all his fellow tax collectors and sinners. In that room, they were Jews, so they probably, some of them believed in God to some varying degree. You know, they probably knew God's rules and regulation, his commandments. But these folks that he invited to the party, they would be considered sort of a shady crew. We also know that Jesus was invited to this party. We know that he amazingly showed up at this party despite who he knew was going to be there. You know, he hung out. He stuck around for dinner. Maybe even had a glass of wine. Scandalous at the time, right? We also know that the religious leaders saw Jesus at Matthew's party, and they were furious over it. So that same Matthew, he's the one that recorded this sermon for us, and it's known as the Sermon on the Mount. And it's found in chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew's gospel account. And the sermon begins with this sort of statement: seeing the crowds, he, that's Jesus, went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. So like the picture there is sort of Jesus is going to begin a sermon. His disciples come, the 12 of them, probably sit close right down front, and then the crowds begin to gather in behind to hear what it is that Jesus has to say. And last week, Pastor Dave, he dug into what Jesus said next. How did he open his sermon? I opened this sermon by giving you a little background on Matthew that I'm going to come back to. But how did Jesus open the Sermon on the Mount? Well, he basically listed this series of blessed statements. And today they're commonly referred to as the Beatitudes. And see, what was going on is Jesus was ushering in a new kingdom that came with new rules, new regulation, new sort of do's and don'ts. And in these blessed statements, he begins to tell us what it means or what it's going to look like to be part of this new kingdom. And he's saying, like, hey, if you want to be blessed in this new kingdom, if you want to flourish, both in your time here on earth and in heaven, he said things like, I'm going to be looking for people who are thirsty for what is right. If you want to flourish in this kingdom, I'm going to be looking for peacemakers. If you want to be blessed, I'm going to be looking for people that are filled with mercy. People that won't run away if they're met with a little bit of opposition. See, in the crowds that were listening to this Sermon on the Mount that day, they had like what I would call two primary versions of how they were hearing and how they were interacting and reacting with what Jesus was saying, particularly when it came to God's commandments. What do I have to do to be a follower of God? And the people in that crowd today, they would have come to that sort of gathering, that sermon, and they'd have sort of two different versions in their mind when it comes to God's law. See, and I believe those two versions are represented here today in the crowds that are gathered at all 6 of our locations. So over the next couple minutes, I'm going to task you to decide which version you tend to sort of lean to a little bit, okay? So here we go. Here's the first version. I'll just call it the tight-gripped version. So that version, you have a very legalistic interpretation of God's rules and regulations. These are the things we do, and these are the things we don't. And you are very black and white about it. You don't leave a lot of wiggle room there. In fact, you're really good at noticing other people doing the don'ts, right? And you sometimes point it out. And you wonder why more of us don't point it out, right? So that's the tight-gripped version. And it's over here, I'll just call it, to make it simple, the loose-gripped version. The loose grip, your interpretations on the rules and the regulations and the law involve taking like bits and pieces, choosing what you think is most important or what sort of best suits you, and you are very comfortable in that. You're very comfortable in that gray area, and you don't understand why more people, like those people over there, can't lighten up a little bit. So if you tend to be loose-gripped version, when you listen to my sermon, you're looking for a loophole. You're looking like, oh, do I really need to do that? Or is that what it's really is? I'm not really sure it's that. You're looking for a loophole. And if you're more on this sort of tight grip, when you listen to my sermon, you think I'm letting people off the hook. You're like, Stevens is getting soft up there. Come on. Now, most likely, you are not like at the extremes of either end of those, right? But I bet all of you could sort of at least say, well, I tend to maybe lean this way or that way. See, there were people representing both groups in the crowd that day, but also both groups were represented among Jesus' 12 disciples sitting right down front. Matthew clearly sort of fell into a little bit more of the loose-gripped category. I mean, this guy, being a Jew, found some loopholes that he could compromise himself to be a tax collector. He's still hanging around with some pretty shady, sinful people. But see, there's another disciple sitting down front for this sermon, and we don't know much about him. In fact, we really only know his name, and his name is Simon the Zealot. Now, zealots were sort of like an organization, almost like a political group at the time, who believed that through their zealous interpretation and obedience to God's law, God's kingdom might come through them. See, Simon was involved in an organization that took the law, the rules and the regulation, the do's and the don'ts very seriously. And some would even call the zealots terrorists of their day. You know, if they had the opportunity to protest or sabotage or even murder a Roman official or soldier, they would do it in the name of God. So you know, or you tend to be a little bit more of a Matthew disciple, sort of loose grip, looking for the loopholes, very comfortable in the gray, or more of a Simon disciple, tight-gripped, always looking to throw a penalty flag when you see something wrong. Very black and white. So as I studied this, what I love so much is that Jesus called both extremes to be part of his tribe, to be part of his 12. And as a church, shouldn't we do the same? Like I don't want to be a part of a church that has no room for the loose-gripped and no time for the tight-gripped. See, I think it's certainly harder to do it this way, but I think it's so much more compelling and so much more God-honoring. So thought experiment here. So this is in your mind. Do you ever imagine like that maybe sometimes Simon looked over at Matthew and said, like, really? This guy's part of the kingdom? You know, this rule bender is part of the team? And do you ever imagine that sometimes Matthew might like look over at Simon and say, like, this guy? He's part of the kingdom? This legalistic zealot is on the team? So let me continue the thought experiment. So in your mind, but let's get a little bit personal. Have you ever done that? Like, can that guy really be a Christian? With who they're hanging out with? What they're doing, what they believe? He's really part of the team? Or have you ever said, you know, can that protester of everything, that against everyone, that Bible-thumping fanatic, he's part of the team? See, and this is really important. There were people in the crowd and in the 12 that day that were wondering which way Jesus was going to lean when it comes to the law. So in Matthew 5:17, picking right up where we left off last week, he answers them. And he says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished." And I picture like at this point, like Simon looks down there at Matthew and says, "You listening to this? Huh? You paying attention? It's all about being holy and righteous. No eating and drinking with sinners, you chump. You paying attention to what he's saying?" And then I think it sort of even gets worse for Matthew because Jesus goes on and says, "Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." But not so fast for the tight grippers, because Jesus closes it with this statement: "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven." The religious leaders and the Pharisees, the scribes, they were the most tight-fisted holy people of the day. And Jesus is saying that you won't even get into heaven unless you can outdo them. And I sort of see at this point like Matthew, like giving a look down to Simon and saying, "Do you hear that, Mr. Righteous Pants? Like, you hear what he just said there?" See, Jesus is saying to the loose-gripped, he's saying there are no loopholes. And he's saying to the tight-gripped, you cannot be righteous enough. Blessedness and flourishing, the kingdom and heaven, he's saying it can only be found in him. I came to fulfill the law. I came to fulfill all the prophecy, all of history. See, my Father so loved the world that he sent me to fulfill his redemptive plan for all of mankind. He's foreshadowing that in a few years from now, I'll go to the cross and die and be raised again so that all who believed in me will be saved. Why did Jesus come? Well, he came to confront sin, right? Jesus never winks at our sin. He never winks at it and says, "Oh, it's hard to be human there, slugger. I get it. That's okay. Just keep trying." No, he confronts it. But Jesus also came to forgive sin. He tells us to repent, and that's a beautiful word, not a harsh word. He's telling us to, I get it, now turn, move in a better direction, repent. Yes, he confronts sin. See, and some of us that lean a little bit on the loose grip side, we don't really like that confront part. Well, don't tell me what I'm doing is wrong. Don't confront me. See, but he also forgives sin. And I think some of us on the tight grip side, we sometimes struggle with that because we want people to be punished. Like they got to get what they deserve for what they did over there. See, but hear me, ultimately, Jesus came to transform hearts. And he wants us to be image bearers. See, we're not to go about doing that like in this legalistic, judgmental, self-righteous manner. But nor are we to go about doing that all income free, like, you get to go to heaven. I don't care what you believe in, you get to go to heaven. No, he wants us to do it in truth and in love. He wants us to be image bearers. He wants people to see him through us, people that desperately need to know the good news of the kingdom. And in order to do that, and that's why we called this series there's times where we need to unlearn some things. Let me talk for a minute. I said that word image bearer a few times. Let me talk about that for a couple seconds. My friend, been friends with Jack for, 10, 15 years now. He opened a boxing gym a little over 2 years ago, and I joined it on the first day. I've always loved the sport, always loved boxing gyms. When you walk into Jack's gym, he has these shirts and sweatshirts for sale. And they have the name of the gym and his logo on it. And Jack will sometimes goof around with a class. He'll say, now, if you happen to be wearing my sweatshirt, and you go pick a fight in a Walmart parking lot, let's say, and you get beat up, take my sweatshirt off before somebody takes a picture, right? So he's like saying, if it's not going to be good, like if you're going to be an image bearer for my gym, it's not good for business, right? If you get beat up with my t-shirt on. But on a serious note, Jack teaches young boys and girls sportsmanship. See, and when you represent Jack's boxing gym in the Golden Glove tournaments, you are taught before you ever step into the ring how to both win and lose with respect. How to have respect for the sport, for the rules, and for your opponent. He allows absolutely no trash talking of someone that you're about to face. You're not allowed to argue with referees. And you're never permitted to yell at a judge if the decision doesn't go your way. You're taught to carry yourself in a certain way to represent his gym. So see, you're connected to the gym. You're an image bearer, and you're expected to represent yourself accordingly. If you are connected to Jesus, then you're an image bearer to the King, and you're expected to represent yourself accordingly. So what does it look like to be an image bearer to the King? Well, what Jesus does next on the Sermon on the Mount is he begins to get specific. He chooses 6 issues. And in each one of these issues, he opens it by saying, you may have heard it said, but I say. He's basically saying, in other words, if you want to be an image bearer, you need to unlearn some things. See, there are lots of issues he could have chosen, and he chose 6. And I would then assume that these are pretty important, right? So today we're going to unpack 3 the rest of our time, and then we're going to look at the rest as we go through this series. And these begin in Matthew 5:21, and you'll see this pattern. You have heard it said, but I say to you. And what that is about there. See, Moses came down from the mountain with the 10 commandments, the law, and he said to the people, this is what God wants us to do. This is what he's expecting of us. See, in Jesus, in this spot, he goes up on the mountain. And he's saying to the people, I know that's what Moses said, but today I'm bringing you something new. See, and as we go through these, I'm just going to read the entire section sort of straight on through. I'm not going to sit and pull apart each verse. These are Jesus' teaching. If you have a Bible, then it has the red print. This is all red print. These are his words, and he's telling us what it means to be an image bearer. So I don't know I need to add much to the enlightenment, but after each one, I'll just sort of unpack it really briefly. So the first one is he's going to address anger. And he says this, you have heard that it was said to those of old. So there's that saying, you shall not murder. It's one of the 10 Commandments. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Jesus, in the beginning there, is acknowledging the law. Thou shalt not murder. I'm not abolishing that. He said, I'm acknowledging that. But like basically, there's a way he's saying here, oh, okay, so you haven't murdered somebody, like good for you, bucko, right? Since when, has that become the standard of morality and virtue? If you want to be an image bearer, then Jesus is saying that it's not about murder. Like you can't even have anger or malice or unforgiveness in your heart. Jesus wants his followers to know that part of following him is living reconciled lives, and not just to God, but to each other. Jesus is for reconciliation. The best way that you can represent Jesus is be reconciled to the people where you live, work, and play. Let me just ask a question. Is there anybody right now in your circle of relationships that you have not forgiven? If so, you've got anger in your heart. And that's not the image God desires you to bear. So I really thought about this statement that I'm going to make, and I prayed about it before I said it. So I say this to you in all humility. There is no one in my life that I have not forgiven. There are some people I don't want to have lunch with, but there are nobody right now in my life that I have not forgiven. And see, when I made the choice to forgive, it most often, it didn't come after they apologized to me. See, if you're waiting for an apology to forgive someone, you might be waiting for a while. Most of the lousy stuff that people have said or done to me, I didn't get an apology. But, and you need to forgive them anyhow, for the sake of your heart. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to transform hearts. The tight grippers sometimes struggle here. After what he or she did to me, I'll never forgive. Jesus can forgive, but I'm not going to forgive. I won't. See, image bearers overcome anger with forgiveness. The second issue that Jesus is going to tackle is lust. And he starts off by saying, you have heard that it was said, there he goes again, and here comes from the 10 Commandments, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery in her heart. His or her heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. Wow, that's harsh language. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Jesus, again, like in the beginning of this, right? He affirmed the law by saying, that don't commit adultery. But however, I think he's saying the same thing here. He's like, come on. Okay, good for you. You didn't do that. However, he is saying, right, that lust begins in the eye, not in the action. Lust or sexual sort of perversion begins in the heart, not in the bedroom. And that harsh language there is he's demanding a decisive action. He's not saying literally cut off your hand. But he's saying stay out of strip clubs. Stop looking at that stuff. Make a decisive action because it's messing with your heart. He's not literally saying gouge your eye out, but he's saying if your computer is causing you to sin, throw it away. Like, come on, Northway. Strip clubs, pornography, adult stores, magazines. We have to at least agree it's dishonoring. It's dishonoring behavior. You know, looking at a woman and imagining what you'd like to do with her is dishonoring. And I think sometimes loose grippers might have a little bit of trouble here. You know, come on, Scott, like it's not a big deal. Pretty girl walks by, so I think about, no one's getting hurt. Well, no one might be getting hurt, but someone's getting dishonored. See, image bearers, they overcome lust with honor. So skipping over one, we're going to come back later. I want to jump down to verse 33 for the third one. And he says this, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. So again, he's acknowledging the law. Hey, don't bear false witness against each other. So good for you. You've never lied to someone about someone in court. But again, as image bearers for Jesus, he's raising the expectation. See, and back then in this time, people, when they were making a promise or a commitment, they would swear these oaths. So I swear this on Jerusalem. I swear this on heaven. I swear this on my family. I swear that they'd make all these crazy oaths and then stamp them, sign them. And we do some of that today, don't we? Like, I swear to God, I swear on my mother's grave. I mean, she's saying, why are you even saying that? Why are you making these oaths? He's saying, just let your yes be yes, and your no be no. How are you doing at keeping your promises? How are you doing at keeping your commitments? How are you doing it when you say that you're going to do something, you do it? I think that sometimes Jesus, he can't even envision his community of followers not acting with integrity and honesty. That's what an image bearer of him would do. It'd be someone that would just go through life acting with integrity and honesty. Jesus is saying that his community is a community of honesty and integrity. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. Image bearers overcome the need for swearing some kind of oath just by pursuing integrity. See, if you pursue loopholes in God's law, it will compromise God's image to those that need to see Jesus in you. If you're out there right now and you're picking and choosing how you're going to follow God, and you're obeying some stuff and you're working around some things, you're compromising your image to someone that really might need to know God. And I'm just telling you, don't pursue legalism because one, it will exhaust you and people will eventually see a hypocrite in you instead of an image bearer because sooner or later you're going to make a mistake. Is righteous and holy and this and that and I'm judging this and I'm telling you not to do this. You're going to trip up. And they're going to say, hypocrite. Look at you, pounding me for all these years. And look, see, what should we pursue then? We should pursue this unbelievable fact that we are adopted, sons and daughters of the Most High God. We should want to put the Jesus Gym t-shirt on and get out there in the world and be an image bearer for him. Jesus is trusting us with his image. Individually and as a church, we're supposed to resemble him. And sadly, I just think the history of Christianity is the story of us trying to avoid Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. Any of these three areas just give you a check? Some unforgiveness in you? If that's the case, man, you got anger in your heart. Is lust something that you're struggling with? It's blocking your ability to honor. You know, if you're really real, like, are you keeping your promises, your commitments, or are you sort of working around them? So how do we do this? Well, Pastor Dave, last week, he said this, and we'll use this line throughout this whole series. He said, the dependent version of you is the best version of you. Like when you're really dependent on God, that's the best version of you. That's when you're really going to be an image bearer. See, when I really go after being dependent on God, I learn that I am way more disobedient than I can even imagine, but I'm way more loved than I can ever dream of. Each one of these weeks, we're giving you a little challenge. Could you this week, so I'm just setting the goal of this week, think about being more dependent on God and pay attention to the image that you are bearing to others. Just pay attention as you're mixing it up out there where you work, live, and play. Is the image that you're bearing one of forgiveness, and one of honor, and one of letting your yes be yes and your no be no? Imagine if we could do that for a week, how we could impact the people that God places in our lives. So, Father God, I would just ask that you would give us the courage, place that on our hearts this week, that we would be a people that want to resemble you, that want to bear your image, to want people to see, just get a little glimpse of you through us. We lift this up in your Son's name. Amen.